Hi everyone. So today I'm going to continue my Explained Correctly series, and I'm going to begin talking about the types themselves. The types explained correctly. The ENFJ. So the ENFJ, the icon explained correctly. Well, when it comes to ENFJs, the reason why I'd say that they are the icon is that of all the types, they are the one most likely to become famous. They're the one most likely to create and sustain an image of themselves that lasts much longer after they may have passed away. They have the greatest capacity to become iconic out of all the different personality types. So, like with all my ways of describing the types, I'm going to be going through the blocks. So, starting off with, we have the ego block for the ENFJ, and that's extroverted feeling and introverted intuition. Now, people get the wrong idea about this block. They think it's sort of very goody two shoes, and ENFJ is always doing sort of nice things for everyone. And while they can certainly do wonderfully nice things, it's important to consider that extroverted feeling and introverted intuition is more about the big picture. It's more about how to inspire people towards the greater, grander things in life and to essentially unite people around causes, around things which are of greatest capacity to inspire people. That's the thing. The ENFJ with FE and NI together is going to be about inspiring people. It's going to be about crafting a message that people are going to respond to in a deeply profound way. And that's not necessarily going to be nice or goody two shoes. It can be quite dramatic, can be quite not quite cushy or comfortable at all. But yes, when we start, we look at the dominant function for the ENFJ, which is extroverted feeling. So, what is this about? This is about mood. This is about emotion. ENFJs are almost without exception passionate people. People who have not only a strength of passion and dynamism in their personality through the sort of the vibrancy of the moods that they experience, but also the ability to channel that and craft moods and images and be able to affect the emotional states of other people around them. ENFJs are fantastic when it comes to finding that way of really plucking at the heartstrings and creating uh, creating some kind of theme or messaging that cause you to really care about what they want to talk about, and they can very capably manage the emotions of say a room, or even at the long distance with say books or artistic publications, anything like that, which is why they tend to become very famous people. um, Now, supporting their use of extroverted feeling, which again it's very sort of strong charisma, able to craft an image or message to appeal to almost anyone. What's supporting that is their introverted intuition. So ENFJs, they are not interested in the humdrum emotions. It's not about niceness or emotional positivity or anything sort of cushy and comfortable like that. For an ENFJ, introverted intuition shapes the mood they express to be that which is most profound, that which cuts deep to the underlying nature of mankind, that which makes you really care about something deeper or bigger, more significant, more transcendent than anything that is humdrum. And yeah, ENFJs can often be quite shocking as a result because they're trying to get at something deeper rather than what's just nice on the surface. They may see niceness on the surface as sort of a fakeness, and they're trying to give you that authentic, raw, powerful self expression. Now, this authenticity of an ENFJ, it's not the sort of just be yourself kind of way. It's more about finding a style, finding an image, finding a brand, as it were, that is able to take or achieve great significance in the public zeitgeist and what everyone talks about, what is most influential. To be an influential meme, as it were, is something which an ENFJ is strongly inclined to become. If we look at examples such as Kanye West, so is very much an influential meme. But if you look at other examples, go back to say a Martin Luther King Jr., or you go back to even someone like a Constantine the Great, very powerful and effective memes. The idea that they enter into the public consciousness, they hook into that in that way, because they're able to manifest them that mood, that charisma across great boundaries and great distances by connecting to something that's profound. So next we get to the super ego block. So this is not what the ENFJ. So the ego block is what the ENFJ brings to the world, as it were. Now this is what is expected of the ENFJ that they often struggle to actually fulfill. And it's that TE and SI space. It's a very sort of down-to-earth, practical space. That's what the ENFJ does not enjoy one bit. These are not practical types, ENFJs. They are not interested in that sort of, oh, you can work hard at that particular thing and practice makes perfect and all that other sorts of thing. They're not interested in this. They are often vibrant, passionate creatives rather than practical people, you could say. And out of the two, the TE and SI, extroverted thinking, TE, that's going to be the more accessible of the two for an ENFJ. ENFJs can be and think pragmatically, right? They can see where a quick thinking solution can get them ahead, can get things to work effectively in that moment. They can do that to some degree. They are not necessarily people who can very quickly in any situation come up with a solution. They need some familiarity to do that, but they do have more flexible and more adaptable ways of thinking that are conducive to being more pragmatic and effective. And an ENFJ will be mindful, because they are so aware of how to style their image over the long run and consider how their image is going to be perceived in years from now. Because of that, they know the need to also come across in a competent way, to have the facts at their disposal to make a strong impression. So they will do that. They will learn the facts they need. They will be able to bring those up in the discussion to make sure that they are coming across as authoritative. And ENFJ, as I said, are the masters at coming across the way they want to come across in the long run. So yes, extroverted thinking, they will do enough of that in order to ensure that they come across as in the know enough to have the effect they want to have on people's emotional states. Now, what they struggle with most, however, is introverted sensation. Whereas an ENFJ, they don't like the facts too much. They can find the facts a bit boring. They'd much rather speak in a more exaggerated and an emotive way to really get to you to feel the intensity of their feelings, as it were. That's sort of just, become more boring and factual. It's not really their cup of tea, but they can do it. Meanwhile, introverted sensation is a blind spot to an ENFJ. ENFJs are deeply passionate people. They have that dynamic restlessness under the surface, a certain heat and intensity, you could say, to them, which means they're often can be a bit frazzled at the edges. They may see the day-to-day detail as a thing that may actually end up getting them in the end, because they are thinking more creatively and in the big picture, and they sort of may not so well manage the logistics. They may need some help in managing the day-to-day logistics, but more and deeper than that is a fundamental blind spot regarding that natural flow and harmony in the day-to-day. ENFJs can create a very standout aesthetic, you could say, but then actually becoming more homely, more down-to-earth, more wholesome, and making it feel balanced and organic and natural feeling, that's more difficult for the ENFJ. These are the ones who put on big fashion shows, you could say, and never wear sort of very strange avant-garde clothing. That's the point. The ENFJs don't have that natural balancing effect in how things are in a day-to-day. They might not realize when they're getting overly intense in their interactions. They might not realize they may have started shouting, for instance, because they don't have that natural regulator or moderator in terms of just being at peace in here and now. That's not what they tend to do, and they can often end up being quite on edge. They can often end up being types which don't easily manage their health, end up in overly intense situations, and almost need those intense situations to thrive. But at the same time, when they actually may need to relax for their health, they may actually find it very hard to actually switch off. These aren't types for whom switching off really is something in their control. They just are types which burn too brightly, you could say, to simply be chilled, be zen in that moment. So yeah, that's some of the major difficulties for an ENFJ. You can imagine a lot of ENFJs ending going off kilter. Some ENFJs can die quite young, you could say, after being greatly successful. People look at Freddie Mercury as a very good example. People just don't really have that natural golden mean balancing factor in their life. It's just a blind spot for them to be able to do that. Okay, so next we go to the super id block, and that is introverted thinking and extroverted sensation. The idea here is that this is the thing which is valued, but it's not strong, right? This is what they need from others and what they aspire to become, you can say. So TI and SE together, this is about structure. It's about force of will. It's about understanding with absolute clarity and conviction what the truth is and being willing to act on that decisively in your environment. So ENFJs, these are the types who are best suited to win over hearts and minds. So the idea of a sort of the colder, more inflexible approach of logic is harder for them to naturally tap into, but they do admire it. Why do they admire it? Well, when we come to the suggestive function, introverted thinking, ENFJs, they have deep insights into things. They just know how things are going to happen. They can get you really excited about what they know will happen. But they struggle to tap into the underlying reasons of why this will happen and how to articulate the key principles or structures to their thinking. They are not structured thinkers. They tend to instead express themselves in the flow of consciousness, you could say. Very certainly quite a dark example of an ENFJ. Adolf Hitler, if you read Mein Kampf, should you ever feel like doing such a thing, you'll see that flow of consciousness way of writing, a lack of structure. ENFJs are not structured people, but they are types that covet the ability to make sense of things in a very clear way. And they can often feel quite vulnerable in terms of not having that sense of structure to hold their own identities together. ENFJs, and being so good at almost faking it until you make it, or becoming the brand, you could say, can lose that sense of what their underlying principles actually are. So what they actually need is someone to actually hold them to what those principles are meant to be, what makes sense, what does not, what is correct, what is true, and what is not, to uphold very clear boundaries. That an ENFJ will respect as long as it's done absolutely consistently. ENFJs can be very disappointed around people who are hypocrites. They cannot stand hypocrisy. They cannot stand injustice. They will feel a great need to act, to bring awareness to the fact that there has been injustice, to change the world, to shape that and fix that evil, as it were. They hate injustice. That's the point. They need things to make sense, to not be arbitrary, to not be hypocritical. They just struggle themselves to really pick out what those underlying principles are that should be stuck to consistently. So, yes, they are very appreciative of those who can create that structure for them. And you'll find that ENFJs, and often later in life, may even find something like a code, a religion, which can be greatly galvanizing to them, to give them that sense of structure. And I've known examples of ENFJs who, when they were younger, can quite easily go off the rails, but once they're given something like a religion or a philosophy, suddenly they absorb that almost wholly, and then suddenly they're able to find a stability in their life because they're following an ideology rather than having to maintain just a balance in their day-to-day life. The structure, the absolute rule and governance of it, as long as it is really strong, it really is ironclad. It's not an illegitimate source of authority and structure. If that structure is really given in a strong, robust way, then ENFJ is greatly respected. Now, what they themselves would like to grow into is their extroverted sensation. ENFJs are types that have a great deal of intensity, as I described before. They want to channel that intensity to really make something of themselves, to really make an impact. They are often quite restless and impatient figures. These are types which often are attracted to higher status in life, to actually have a material achievement in some kind of way. They want to make their impact. They want to have that statue with their face on it, perhaps, but or belong to those sort of most exclusive clubs, as it were. Just have climbed up in that kind of hierarchy. Now, for ENFJs to get up there, they need to be tough. They need to be strong. They aspire towards becoming tough, strong people, able to utilize their force of will and not just their charisma. But this is something which is more fragile in an ENFJ. Sometimes they can be utterly formidable people when they understand how to utilize their force of will in that moment. Other times, they'll lose it. They'll lose that sense of strength and empowerment, and they may actually retreat into themselves. They may start becoming more speculative, perhaps becoming more creative rather than directly confrontational. But if an ENFJ is in, say, a debate with someone, they may start more quickly resort to more overly aggressive methods, and they may become overly aggressive because they can't quite read exactly how to utilize their force in the most appropriate way. So, yeah, these are some of the things you know about ENFJs: that intensity, that often a quick temper one can often see, and but also not necessarily knowing how to apply that in the best way in all situations. And when they feel not able to act decisively, a sort of, well, feeling that they themselves are not strong enough and lacking confidence in themselves, and certain self-doubt can suddenly creep in these situations. So ENFJs, as they grow, they become tougher, they become more strong and more confrontational. But yeah, now we get to FI and NE in the id block. This is what the ENFJ is very strong at, but they don't value for its own sake. That sort of hearing different perspectives and really seeing the good in others and trying to build very close personal ties, and unlock and develop people in the one-to-one. That's not really the tempo of an ENFJ. ENFJs are the people who want to walk the grand stage. They want to make a very big social impact in some kind of way. So the one-to-one personal connection exploration side is not really valued by them, but they can certainly do it. And it can certainly allow them to come across in a more sincere, but also more open way. First of all, we have the ignoring function, which is introverted feeling. So again, ENFJs, they do have a good sense of their personal attitudes towards people, how close they ought to be. But they'll put that aside at almost every opportunity in order to focus on the extroverted feeling, how they're coming across to others, what their brand is. These are people who place greater emphasis on the public, you could say, than the private in their day-to-day life. ENFJs very frequently can become celebrities. They can become very influential figures in politics and music and all these other kinds of things. But that means often the personal life, their closest one-to-one relationships, may actually suffer as a result. They may not have as many closer people. They may have multiple affairs in some cases. I'm not saying all cases. It depends on the ENFJ, of course, and what principles they've been raised under. But what I would say is that when it comes to that introverted feeling, it's there. It's just not placed an emphasis on, unless that enables them to come across more sincerely, more authentically. You could say it allows them to read the sort of personal sensitivities and attitudes of each person to better come across to their audience. But it's not done for its own sake. In contrast, extroverted intuition. This is something an ENFJ uses quite a fair bit, whereas an ENFJ has, little time for the sort of tutting personal judgment of introverted feeling. They don't like to feel judged at all. They can resist that greatly. Their extroverted intuition, can be quite receptive to. They don't value it for its own sake again, but they tend to be highly creative, highly mercurial, able to cast their mind in all sorts of different directions, able to be very avant-garde at the very sort of the front end of their creativity. And you can think of examples such as Lady Gaga or, or David Bowie as being highly creative sorts of individuals. They utilize this extrovert intuition in concert with their introverted intuition, allowing them to be open to a very broad range of different ideas and influences, which they then funnel through their introverted intuition to find those most meaningful, transcendent themes in their work, which are able to grip people in a profound way. So it's very much the mixture of intuitions under their extroverted ethics, which can be so powerful. Now, when an ENFJ is not at their best, because at their best, they're actually far more assertive, far more empowered to act. When they're not at their best, they'll fall back on extroverted intuition to become more doubtful, find themselves speculating what else could be. They may, for instance, find themselves speculating on the intentions of other people with introverted feeling, and they may often assume people could have no goodwill towards them whatsoever. I've seen ENFJs who often don't think about good and bad and may just assume that everyone is sort of evil and potentially cruel when they're in that sort of more self-doubting and sort of vulnerable feeling space. Of course, it's just their introverted feeling and extroverted intuition playing up and sort of speculating on people's personal attitudes in a negative way. But they may then overly gauge how am I then going to come across to people to make sure that no one can paint me in the wrong sort of way. So yeah, when they're not at their best, they become very speculative and very open to some kind of crazy possibilities at times. But yes, they just need to be sort of brought back to reality with the cold, hard facts, as it were. So yeah, that's what I'd say about the ENFJ.
Hi, if you're enjoying this video, you'll love the in-depth content found on the Type Mastery Pathway, our comprehensive course. Learn everything I know about socionics in over 20 hours of video lectures across 6 modules, with over 100 video examples. Sign up today by clicking the link in the description below.
The ISTJ, or also known as the inspector. So if you recall from my J versus P video, as well as my other videos about the introverts, I am not going to be utilizing the usual MBTI convention for what is a J and what is a P. I feel that the ill-considered notion that J being derived from whichever of the top 2 cognitive functions that are rational being extroverted is what constitutes a J. Well, I think it has had a debilitating effect on how the cognitive functions can be well understood. So no, instead I go by a consistent approach, which is that what makes a J type, in the case of the ISTJ, is having as their dominant function either thinking or feeling, which are rational elements. So the ISTJ, I would say, is not SI plus TE, but rather TI plus SE. And this is where a real understanding of J-ishness can actually come about. You actually need TI and SE, not SI and TE, to have the understanding of a J as opposed to a P. Why is this? Well, if you understand TI and SE correctly, then you'll acknowledge that this is about structure, which is TI, logical structure, things being internally consistent, that structure being imposed via extroverted sensation onto the physical reality. So this is the true imposition of order combination, TI and SE, not SI and TE, as we will come to see. Now, unfortunately, because of the JP switch difficulty, which the MBTI has encountered, they have confused essentially the ISTJ and the ISTP. The true ISTJ, this order enforcer, this inspector figure, you could say, is very much a type that needs to be TI and SE, not SITE. And we'll talk about SITE when we eventually reach the ISTP explained correctly. So now let's talk about this ISTJ. Well, as I said, TI and SE is that order enforcing combination. And the idea here is that introverted thinking is the dominant function. This is what drives the ISTJ's motivations. ISTJs are perhaps the most clear-cut, most order-oriented types out of all the different types available. They are the ones which are very much about everything needing to make sense, needing to be clear, needing to be ordered, and these are the types that will wade into the environments of ambiguity and enforce an order, bring things into a pinning down of sense, you could say. They have no room in them for nonsense. ISTJs enforce what is structured, you could say. They often have a very strong, rational, orderly mind for how they make sense of things around them. They understand criteria, and they're very specific about making sure those criteria are absolutely true, are absolutely unimpeachable. They have a rigor in their ability to break apart dodgy or false ideas to find and assert the absolute truth underneath, or to discard the thing which lacks in truth. They are very uncompromising in making sure that whatever they do is utterly consistent, utterly impregnable in its logical argumentation. And they lean towards formulating clear structures, clear rules, clear boundaries, anything like this to make sure that their environment is ordered, is made sense of. Now, supporting their introverted thinking, therefore, is an extroverted sensation. This is how an ISTJ is different to an INTJ, whereas the INTJ lacks the ability to enforce their structures onto reality. They don't particularly care for it. They prefer to explore different possibilities around their structures. ISTJs, these are the ones who enforce the order. These are the ones who say, this is what makes sense, so I will make it so in my reality. I will impose that onto my surroundings. I will draw a line in the sand, and whoever thinks it clever to cross said line will have the consequences of their actions enforced upon them. These rules are made writ either in nature or through the force of my will. That is the nature of an ISTJ, to make sure that the structure is upheld by real life consequence. So these aren't types that allow for ambiguity, exploration, all that sort of stuff. No, it's a very clear cut, very confident, this is what the truth is, and this is what we're acting upon. So you find they make natural enforcers, natural policemen, hence the name inspector can often come into account here. But could very easily also be lawgivers to a society, a judge in society, someone who without arbitrariness weighs things up according to what the rules are and applies that. And saying that, it's not necessarily the case that ISTJs will be necessarily the upholders of the established order. If they disagree with the established order and find it to be faulty or hypocritical, they could even be the leader of a revolution against said order to tear it down and start afresh with a new order. Because that's the thing, they don't compromise. They are types which need to, if something is untrue, it needs to be torn asunder and the new structure brought. It's that absoluteness in their clarity which is definitional for an ISTJ. Next, you move to the superego block, because the ego block, that's what they're strong at. They value what they bring to the world. Now, this is what is kind of expected of them, but they don't necessarily conform to it. So this is the realm of introverted feeling and extroverted intuition. ISTJs are types that often struggle with seeing and factoring in different people's perspectives and making personal exceptions for each individual and their unique circumstances and exploring those unique circumstances. For an ISTJ, the rules need to be applied consistently in all cases. It is the hand of justice and not necessarily the hand of mercy when it comes to an ISTJ. So these are types which can struggle in this sort of very FI and NE kind of space. What they can do somewhat is their introverted feeling. ISTJs are types which can build stronger, closer relationships with others. They can be quite loyal to certain people. They know how to manage people on the one-to-one to some degree. They aren't utterly masterful at it, but they can certainly handle that. They can manage that well. You can think of examples of ISTJs, those who are a bit more ambitious may climb say, a political hierarchy or something like that through their managing of close one-to-one relationships in backroom conversations. They aren't ones for the big public's display. That's not where their strength lies, but they can certainly apply their will through their one-to-one relationships quite effectively. So yes, they are good at forming that, but they struggle with the idea of compromising their principles or their structures, their ideologies, in favor of personal one-to-one favoritism. So these are types who are inclined to see people less in terms of their personal character and more in terms of their adherence to the right structure or way of thinking that the ISTJ expects. And when it comes to applying their rules and structures, they will not be so interested in personal intentions, what someone meant to do and all that sort of thing. They'll be more interested in whether the rule has been transgressed or not and what the appropriate form of justice is for the transgression of that rule. Hence, justice is applied across different people based on their dictate. Now, what they are less able to do, what is their blind spot, that would be extroverted intuition. As while an ISTJ is aware of their personal attitudes towards others and can build close relationships with people and maintain these loyalties relatively well, they struggle far more with being able to think outside of their experiences. These are not types who think outside the box. These are not types that are comfortable with keeping things open-ended and able to go into all sorts of directions and possibilities. The ISTJ seeks to remove ambiguity from the equation, to define things absolutely and clearly and correctly to the point where there isn't even any room for a debate. If there is a debate, it's because the ISTJ has found the way to shut it down by tearing apart the alternative point of view. They don't allow possibility to run away from them. They aren't types that are comfortable with open-endedness. They need things to be absolutely clear, and they are the creators of not only clarity, but also certainty. There's an absoluteness there, that certainty which ISTJs bring, which you wouldn't have found with, say, the ENTPs or INTJs. These are very much an ISTJ, the TI and SE way of doing things. Next, we have the super id block. Now, this is what is weak still, but now valued. So for ISTJs, these are quite intense characters. They have a certain steeliness of intensity. They are longing to feel impassioned. The problem is, ISTJs come across as kind of cold, sometimes a bit stiff at times, you might say. These are not charismatic figures. They can have the sort of strong, silent, toughness, which can have its own kind of charisma, one could suppose. But these are not types which are especially warm or effervescent. If you think of, say, Vladimir Putin as an example, tough, but not necessarily gregarious or loquacious in that sort of way. No, when it comes to extroverted feeling and introverted intuition, the ISTJ is looking for others to provide that inspiration and that sense of uplifting mood and energy towards a higher purpose. So, first of all, you have the suggestive function. This is what the ISTJ is very weak at. They are not charismatic people. They often, whereas they can certainly use cold, relentless logic to make absolute sense of things and brook no opposition, these are not the ones who are going to sway hearts and minds. They may, at times, come across too stiff, too technical, too much of a cold fish to really get that point of view across. You may find some ISTJs may end up being quite isolated because their logical positions are not ones which are readily accepted or popular to others. And the ISTJ won't allow popularity to change what they think to be absolutely true. They will embark on what is true until people agree with them. They won't bend and contort themselves for what the crowd wants, while at the same time wanting the crowd to agree with them. But they won't budge an inch in that. They can be incredibly stubborn, ISTJs. You think of characters such as Peter Hitchens as an example. Another example is someone who can take often quite unpopular positions and may have been found out to have been right all along, but he wasn't going to budge on his position at all at that particular point. So ISTJs don't. They're not only are they quite stubborn, they come across as very stubborn. Can come across perhaps as quite arrogant at times. They can basically not be so effective at coming across in a way which is going to lead people to actually flock to how they think. They struggle with that. They struggle with bringing people on board, and they greatly admire those who are able, through that kind of charisma, to bring people on board, to infuse people about this underlying structural truth which the ISTJ finds and sets out. Now, what the ISTJ is more able to do themselves, however, is introverted intuition. The ISTJ over time starts to become more aware of something deeper, more higher, more transcendent, some kind of goal or outcome or purpose, which becomes the granter of greater meaning and deeper meaning to the truth they've set out as being absolutely clear and consistent and just and right, whatever that is. So ISTJs are looking for that higher, deeper quality. And over time, they start to know what that is. When an ISTJ finds that path of meaning, of purpose, whatever it is, of significance, that then allows them to narrow down all the other possibilities. ISTJs are types that, because they don't brook ambiguity, they don't like to open things up. It's with introvert intuition that they learn to truly close down all alternative positions to just the path ahead, at which they will go forwards, often with sheer determination. Nothing can then turn an ISTJ away from what they see to be the main goal going forwards. You think of someone like a Nicola Sturgeon in the SNP in the UK, nothing would get in her way of securing independence for Scotland until her inability to judge the mood got in her way and caused her to be removed. So the introvert intuition is sort of something which can lead an ISTJ without a sense of nuance to narrowing down the possibility to one outcome and only pursuing that outcome very stubbornly, without the ability for anyone to really dissuade them from their view. These are the types which are hardest of all the types to dissuade from that path once they've set out upon it. So now we get to the id block. This is what the ISTJ doesn't value but is good at. Well, this is about the day-to-day practicality, the making things work through tinkering and trying it out and experimenting, a very sort of pragmatic approach to thinking and sensation. ISTJs are relentlessly logical. They are precise, meticulous, clear-cut in their nature. They don't like so much the mess of just trying things out and collecting data and seeing what works and what doesn't in that sort of gradual, tinkering, cumulative way. It's very much for them, is it right or is it wrong? If it's wrong, you tear it down, you build it up from its base again in the right way. These are not types which gradually tweak. So when it comes to the ignoring function of an ISTJ, that's going to be the extroverted thinking. ISTJs are not inclined to think pragmatically. Yes, they can certainly do things pragmatically. They certainly know how to make things work and ground their ideology in reality to some degree. Yes, they will do that. They can also build their sense of what the truth is from observing how things work, and they tend to acquire a great deal of factually informed knowledge over time, which enables them to pick out what the underlying truth really is. But these are not types that simply go for, what may work best and is most conducive or convenient. These are not types of convenience. These are types of faith in this being the truth, this being what makes sense, and everything else being nonsense. So these are not types that are going to easily compromise and find the way that leads to a practical advantage here, but actually means compromising on what you believe in. That's not the point of an ISTJ. They can certainly see what other compromises which don't go against their structures they may be willing to make, but they're not going to do that if it's runs counter to the structure they happen to uphold and believe in. You can sometimes see ISTJs behaving quite differently simply because you might not know exactly what their structure is. Of course, they might necessarily tell you, but this is meant to be the rule in terms of introverted thinking over extroverted thinking for an ISTJ. Yes. Now, the other part here is the demonstrative function, and this is introverted sensation. So whereas an ISTJ will only use a sort of more practical, more pragmatic and situational kind of logic sparingly, where it is required by their introverted thinking, right, to do it, right, where it's in line with their principles, it's in line with the structure they're trying to uphold. Introverted sensation, on the other hand, they're going to be using far more readily and in the background. What you'll see with ISTJs is, although they have that steely intensity, these are not types that are likely to burn out. They're not types that like to fill the room with too much energy, you could say. It's very contained with ISTJ. There's almost a sense of not overly expressed confidence, but it's there. It's a stillness, it's a calm, it's a sense of complete control to the point where you don't really even need to move so much, but you know that the ISTJ has that control over their surroundings. It is that ability to stay balanced, to stay calm, to keep the sword sheathed, you can say, until the right moment to strike. And the ISTJ has that in spades. They know exactly when to have their feet on the ground, how to be aware of the balance and flow and harmony in the day-to-day, how to keep their struggles towards a certain ideology or philosophy, whatever it is, sustainable over time, rather than blow hard and then blow hot and cold. These are types that maintain a very even-keeled rate of energy use in their lives. And also, to help them in their structure and correctness, they have a fantastic eye for detail. They'll keep things very clear-cut, both aesthetically and logically. And they'll drill in detail to exactly what is sticking out to remove the problem from the root. So introverted sensation is a very useful tool for an ISTJ in order to be more clear, more absolute in their approach, and more sustainable in their delivery towards the outcomes they think are most important. Anyway, that was the ISTJ.
Me again. The Type Mastery Pathway awaits. We're currently offering the course at a 50% discount, so consider signing up before the time runs out. To find out more, click the link in the description below.
ESTP, the Conqueror. So, what can we say about ESTP? Why are they the Conqueror? Well, because this is the type that is most likely to want to take charge and impact in a big way on their present surroundings. So, what we have first is the ego block, what they bring to the world. And for the ESTP, this is bringing together extroverted sensing and introverted thinking. So, this type is very much about bold, decisive action on setting out what they want and impacting on their environment to get what they want. And they utilize both force of will, but also a certain, awareness of structure and making sense of things to support them getting what they want, essentially. So, yes, the idea of creating structure and narrative and rules and systems to support that pursuit of force, pursuit of power, pursuit of the material things that they want, essentially. So, dominant function for the ESTP is extroverted sensation. So, this is the main thing about them. They are highly intense, proactive, decisive individuals. There's no subtlety to ESTPs. They get what they want. They have this primal urge to be the dominant one, to be the one in charge, to be the big tough fellow, you could say. If it's a fellow, not necessarily a fellow. Very good at tactical intelligence, being able to act quickly in the moment, being able to quickly assess the advantages and disadvantages, the threats, the opportunities of people around them and the situation around them, be able to act to the best advantage in that moment. They're very good at that. They are brilliant tacticians, ESTPs. And the idea is that they're motivated towards usually higher status, usually material wealth, usually force of conquest, the idea of fighting for glory or carving out big tracts of land through their action. These are all things which you'll find ESTPs being quite motivated by, depending on the particular age in which you find that ESTP, whether more medieval or more modern day, etc. There's always that combative side to them, this idea of pitting the force of will against other wills and winning out, being the toughest one, having the most muchness to them compared to anyone else. That's crucial to the ESTP. The idea of the struggle, the idea of the fight, the idea of the hunt is very much in line with extroverted sensation, which motivates them. But supporting extroverted sensation is introverted thinking. So ESTPs have also an intellectual, structural side to them. These types are very good at setting out the rules to make sense of their surroundings, to support their continued ability to win and acquire the power that they want. So they can very quickly formulate and reformulate rules and dictates and decrees if they're in a position to be doing such a thing, or setting out certain ideologies under which they are more likely to win and get ahead. The idea of winners versus losers, for instance, the idea of what we do is the best, what they do is not the best. And they're very good at working with structures of meaning, asserting things and reasserting those things until they are actually believed, to frame things in the way that is to their advantage. They can come out with certain insults or certain labels to attach to people, and they can, over time, people start to believe those labels because they're asserted again and again and again. It's stamped onto their reality, and that then suits the ESTP and whatever they want to win or go for. So they're very good at creating these very clear distinctions. They're very confident in their logic and setting out what things are, the way things just are, what the truth really is. They're very good at entering that sort of debate scenario and tearing apart other arguments. You know, they're not just physical, they've also got that sort of mental strength, and they're quite dynamic in the kind of thinking which they're able to use to quickly make sense of new things, assess what the underlying rules are, and then being able to act accordingly. So yes, very intellectually confident types, ESTPs. Now, the superego block for the ESTP, this is what they don't value and they aren't strong at. So this is the realm of considering lots of different possibilities, being sensitive to people's intentions, giving people the benefit of the doubt based on sort of trust and hope for their inner potential for goodness to shine. That's not all kind of alien to an ESTP. These are not really lovers, they are fighters, you could say. When it comes to, first of all, extrovert intuition in the role function, sure. ESTPs, more so than the ISTJ, which we would have looked at before, more so than ISTJ, ESTPs are able to think outside the box. They're able to remain open to alternative possibilities. They can do it. They can have that sort of more creative approach to their thinking, right? They can consider what else could be. But they don't like talking shops. They don't like discussion for the sake of discussion. They don't like opening up new possibilities for its own sake. The way of the ESTP is to be direct, is to confront the thing head on, is to go through and cut the Gordian knot, you could say. So these are not types to sit and discuss and speculate. They are people of action. And by being people of action, the idea of speculation is not really natural or comfortable for them. They can do it, but it's not something they enjoy doing at all. And they can't do it especially well either. It's, they can do it, but there can be situations where they won't be able to be open enough. It's in a completely new situation for them, perhaps. So yeah, that's their role function. Then we have the vulnerable function, which is introverted feeling. So this is the blind spot to ESTPs. These types are not easily aware of the underlying intentions of people, the character of people. Are people really good? Are people really bad in their nature? The ESTP isn't really focused on that. They don't really give it much credence. As far as the ESTP is concerned, they are in an environment of constant battle with anyone and everything. They can form occasional truces with people, perhaps ongoing truces with people, but it's a truce in an environment of ongoing war and ongoing battle, because these are naturally fighters in their nature. They are martial in their thinking. So the idea of a set relationship, a bond of loyalty over time, they can demand loyalty in terms of fealty because of their greater might, their greater accomplishment, you could say. But these aren't the types to forge a one-to-one relationship based on their personal attitude towards that person's attitude back. Instead, ESTPs may struggle with maintaining stable, close relationships with others. They may take issue with someone complaining about them in public, for instance, and suddenly turn against that person. And they won't easily preserve those loyalties as a result. Or they may go on what someone is showing and saying externally rather than reading the undercurrents of someone's intentions to know whether to trust them or not. It can lead to ESTPs being betrayed later on as a result. ESTPs often do things in public, in playing up to the public, which can sort of hurt their closer personal relationships. So for an ESTP to really manage well in the relational sphere, they need someone who is very tolerant. They need someone who is not going to be judgmental of them and their character. They need someone to whom, as long as they get upset and as long as they find that way to show their contrition in some sort of show of passion, they will be forgiven for whatever actions they've done to transgress. And the ESTPs will transgress. They don't easily respect personal boundaries and personal disagreements. They see this as all something to overcome. Something if they impact enough, they can get what they want in almost any situation. So yeah, ESTPs are not so interested in personal intentions. That's sort of what I like or dislike under the surface. They're interested in what people are expressing and what people are doing and how that will come across. So yeah, that's the blind spot to an ESTP. These aren't types who get personally offended and talk about things in that kind of way. They are types which are very much more about, what is the logic? Does it make sense? Is it hypocritical or not? Are you a bad character or not? They may say if someone is bad character, but it's usually part of their narrative formation to win out against an opponent, you could say. But they'll decide things not based on personal conscience-driven attitude, but rather based on a code they would put together, a way of being, perhaps from their introverted thinking. Next, we have the super id block for the ESTP. So this is what is valued but is weak. So ESTPs, what they really like and appreciate from others, that sense of destiny, that sense of purpose, something more significant, something to really care and feel passionate about. And ESTPs struggle to create that themselves. They are tacticians. They're not strategists. They're certainly not political strategists. They lack the nuances and the subtlety of manipulation. They tend to be very obvious and overt in what they do and what they want to get, and they're very good at that sort of obvious, overt way of getting what they want. So this takes us to the suggestive function, first of all. Introverted intuition. I said ESTPs are pure tacticians. They are not strategists. They do not think very well far ahead. They can plan, they can set out what they want to do. They don't have the intuition for just knowing how things will turn about. They see what's going on around them. They know how to react in the moment, but they don't have that intuitive sense of where things are going. Saying that, they greatly admire a sense of destiny, a sense of outcome. They will look to the seer, to the mystic, to provide them with that sense of greater destiny to fight for. And then there'll be not only a warrior, but a crusader for that, should they feel that cause is worthwhile enough. You can think of examples such as, think of sort of like Richard the Lionheart finding that crusade to fight abroad in the Middle East, you could say. But other examples, the guy who played the Godfather in The Godfather, finding that the actor for that, finding the cause of the Native Americans to take up. So there are, this idea of finding this overwhelming cause, this thing which is higher, as it's Marlon Brando. Finding that cause is very important to these types. They're not able to find that really themselves or have confidence in articulating what that is. They tend to, on their own, believe in things like luck, believe in things like being able to get the one up in that moment, but they need something deeper, something more transcendent, more significant in order to fight for, to give them that direction. And that's something which, a certain other type, which I'll cover next, is able to cover. Without it, yes, ESTPs may charge headlong into things. They may be too hasty. They may be too impatient. They may just, not see the future outcomes of their actions. They may do things which look very convenient in that immediate moment to win, and they may win the battle, but they may inadvertently lose the war as a result. That's one of the problems. Next, we have the mobilizing function. So this is what the ESTP takes on themselves. The idea here is that ESTPs like to be admired. They like to have and create a positive reaction in other people. Same thing with ENTPs. The ESTP is going to be more happy to have that sort of impact of fame and notoriety, even if it's not necessarily positive. They still want to be admired. If people are saying bad things about them or affecting their reputation, they're going to go out and they're going to challenge that. They're going to protect their reputation. Respect is a very important thing for an ESTP, and they all do what they can to secure that respect, to maintain their street cred, you could say, to manifest themselves, whether or if you're thinking more in a medieval way, on coinage, to project their power in a way which also conveys their image. ESTPs are very much about being known, having a reputation, achieving fame, having stories of glories to brag about in public is definitely something an ESTP would be very happy to do and talk about. The problem is sometimes, because they lack that sort of restraint and personal attitude formation, they can come across as buffoonish at times, a bit like ENTPs can. They can overdo it. They can overstep the boundary in trying to create the reaction in others. And that can cause them to be looked upon in a negative way or to polarize their audiences. Think about someone like Silvio Berlusconi and his actions with various women, essentially destroying his reputation. That's the sort of problem an ESTP could end up getting into. Or you think someone like Donald Trump becoming almost the most hated man by the various press, mainstream press at least. That's an example of where that focus on reputation could also backfire. So yes, this need to be a recognized figure, but to have that lead to a positive reputation is sort of a tightrope which these types often tread. As they become more confident, the more they'll be likely to take risks in this area, and the more likely this could backfire for them. Now we turn to the id block, and that is SI and TE, introverted sensing and extroverted thinking. So these types can do the day-to-day practicality, right? They are good at that. They know how to handle that. They are practical types. However, they are not so interested in the idea of gradually working on things, building up skills to improve in their functioning for its own sake. These are types about impact, and they're about total structural changeover and revolution of whatever it is they want to do in order to make that impact. ECPs are seeking status. They're seeking a dominance in their society, in their immediate environment. It's not simply about practicing skills and learning competence. It's to acquire greater status and greater push power, you could say, in the world around them. So with that lens, if you look at their ignoring function, that would be introverted sensation. ESTPs are high intensity characters. They are restless. They are relentless. They are highly active people. They have their impact on their surroundings. They aren't peaceful people. They often might not know what to do in a time of peace. They are at their best in the time of war, in the time of urgency and emergency. So peace feels almost dead to them. That's not where they're likely to do well. They are, however, able to see things in detail, able to balance the details around them in the day to day, but they will only do it to secure material advantages, not just to keep things nice and peaceful and friendly and harmonious. Saying that, they can be quite set on what is allowed in their space. They control their space, not going to let things which they don't like into their space, like, for instance, a certain food they don't like or something else. If something offends their eye, which they do have that aesthetic sense, they are not going to allow it in their vicinity. As part of their impact, they're also going to be quite controlling over the introverted sensation aspect, except it will be purely in support of their extroverted sensation. So, yes, not the sort of peaceful, harmony-seeking types, but rather restless, often conflict-seeking types. Finally, we have the demonstrated function, that's extroverted thinking. ESTPs do not value that pragmatic way of thinking for its own sake. They prefer that sort of more absolute structural way of thinking, but they tend to use it a lot. ESTPs are very good at quickly assessing a situation, understanding the rules of the terms of play, and also then finding solutions to make this work efficiently and effectively. They can be very efficient and effective in the way that they work. They can quite take for granted their ability to absorb factual information and figure it out as they go along. They're very good at improvising with their heads in that moment. They might not be the sort of hard-working students, you could say. They might not spend too much time rehearsing or practicing. They're perhaps at their best just going in and figuring it out. But they will be able to absorb a great deal of factual information, may relax by actually absorbing information, learning, picking things up, applying new skills. But again, it's not for its own sake. It's more for that maximized impact. But yes, ECPs take their ability to take in facts and apply them for granted. It's a very strong area for them. They're very practical, very hands-on, very able to sort almost everything out and take things off other people's hands. And in doing so, and being competent in this way, that allows them to achieve more control and more power and more dominance over their surroundings. Anyway, I hope that helps. That is the ESTP.
You might not be ready to purchase the Type Mastery Pathway all at once. That's fine. If you want to get a taster, you can now purchase specific modules one at a time. How about Module 4, which looks at every one of the 16 types in depth, including how they adapt and change their behaviour across different situations? Find out more by clicking the link in the description below.
The INFP. This is the true INFP. This is not the fake INFP. This is the INFP, the mystic, which begins with introverted intuition, supported by extroverted feeling. So I talk about the mystic. Why the mystic? Well, because this is the type which, more than any other type, is most oriented towards things of greater spiritual significance, things which are otherworldly, things which have very little to do with day-to-day practical realities, but rather a reaching towards the profound. That is the nature of the INFP. As I said, it leads with introverted intuition. Remember, as I've been covering in all these introverted types, my Explain Correctly series, if an introvert leads with a perception, in this case, introverted intuition, they should be a perceiving type, not a judging type. That is what the Myers-Briggs type indicator got wrong. So the true INFP starts with introvert intuition, not, as some may think, introverted feeling. So the idea of introverted intuition and extroverted feeling together creates this effect where this is a type which is oriented towards thinking of those most profound and meaningful outcomes, but also romanticizing those outcomes, getting people on board with those outcomes, making these outcomes feel like something to feel passionate about, something to feel is ultimately worthwhile and believe in with fervor. So, first of all, we have introvert intuition as a dominant function. So, this is the key point, right? These are highly reflective, imaginative types. INFP spend a lot of time in their heads thinking about what is essentially the most significant path forward. This is not a type that just explores for the sake of exploring. It's more about finding those outcomes, finding those pathways of greater significance. And the idea is that they want to follow that path. They want to find a life which aligns to the certain outcomes of greater significance to them. And this will come to them almost like a flash of insight, a sense of, this is the direction we need to be going. This is of greatest importance. This is what is ultimately meaningful, to the point where everything else will seem quite trivial to the INFP. This is the pathway forward, nothing else. So there's an idea of a faith in a future that is characteristic to this type. An idea that there is a certain idealism that comes forwards as well. And it's not necessarily the case they're going to be so targeted in this is the outcome. It could be for some INFPs a general attraction towards things which suggest or hint at a deeper profundity or significance. It may be an admiration of music that strikes at certain deeper themes in humanity. It could be someone who likes to collect items which have a certain oldness to them, or speak of something symbolic or deep to interpret that lies beneath the banal towards either the gothic or the somehow, uncanny in some kind of way. It's that kind of feel, it's that kind of vibe which the INFP types are reaching towards. And when I say it's like a vibe, it's because it's very much blocked with extroverted feeling. So the INFP is often very good at looking ahead, seeing how things will be. And there's no alternative. It will be this way. They just know it's going to come out in this particular way. And what they utilize extroverted feeling for is to bring people on board with that long-term outcome, whatever it is, or to express a certain mood or a certain vibe in line with a certain symbolic themes or patterns of meaning that they want to convey. So extroverted feelings is how they then connect these patterns with other people, get other people interested and excited or motivated by it. And INFPs are very gifted at working, especially on the one-to-one, in bringing people into the fold, in building a certain group, a certain exclusive belonging, a certain collecting together of people who are all on the same path and journey. The INFP is very able at talking to people in a way which isn't overtly manipulative, but rather is able to subtly get people to do what they want to do, essentially. They are very able to conduct themselves in a sort of diplomatic way. And in doing so, they are more likely to blend in rather than stand out. It's not about being the one who draws attention to themselves. It's not like the ENFJ is often a very dramatic and mood-setting individual. For INFPs, it's more about blending into any particular mood, any social environment, which makes them very easy to like and very likely to survive any sort of social situation. They're the ones who, in such as a purge or a caliphate, assuming they weren't the one leading the ideology, they'd be very good at socially surviving, at least being the one person who is not disliked enough by anyone to actually inherit some kind of position of power in the long run. So these types are very good at playing the long game. They're very good at thinking ahead in terms of where things are like to go, how conversations now will affect conversations in the future, and sort of positioning their image to actually benefit from that in the long run. So that's some of the things I say about extroverted feeling. Very able to be chameleonic, to blend in, not to stand out too much compared to certain other beta types. Now we turn to the superego block, and this is what is not valued by the INFP and is not an area of strength, it's an area of weakness. So this is again, like the ENFJ, about day-to-day practicality. INFPs do not like this part of reality. What they can do to a certain degree is introverted sensation. This is the one type where you'll see far less extroverted sensation than introverted sensation. So this will actually be quite a gentle and peaceful seeming type for a beta type. They tend to be very good at keeping the peace, smoothing things over, being more diplomatic, you could say. They can also maintain the day-to-day environment, keep things nice enough. But the idea is that this is something which is kind of painful for an INFP to do for too long. They are types who don't actually want peace and harmony in the day-to-day. Instead, they are craving intensity. They just don't know how to create that themselves. So this is almost like a role they feel they have to put on to manage their day-to-day because they cannot take a more confrontational approach to the day-to-day. They need help in that area. Now, whereas they are better at sort of creating a positive aesthetic and smoothing things over in the day-to-day, where they really struggle is when introverted sensation is blocked with extroverted thinking. Now, this is their blind spot. This is where it's about practicality. It's about how things work. It's about how to improve what you're doing. It's how to be more efficient. It's how to update what you know to be true based on new factual information. INFPs struggle with this. Even the idea that they are a being that needs to be in continuous development is strange to an INFP. The INFP discovers who they are, they find their identity, they find that path of significance, and that is who they are and what they're about. They're not a type that's looking to change, their models of thinking and how they work and how to improve things and how to adapt to practical realities. INFPs are not types which tend to learn and practice new skills, for instance, or do things very efficiently or very effectively. They may struggle to well, they may struggle with the expectation they should be improving how things work and taking in new information. Often they'll just try to get someone else to do boring practical things for them, and they're certainly not the sort of person to listen to a long lecture full of factual information. They won't really take it in. It's going to be more for them more about what is actually meaningful and significant and tuning out all the factual noise. So that's one of the blind spots of an INFP, where they're most likely to struggle, that need to be practical in the day-to-day. And certainly if you put them in a situation where someone have to learn how to make something work and they have to think fast about it, they're probably not going to be very quick about doing that. They're far more likely to be a type that, again, will be far more comfortable getting someone else who's more practical to do everything for them, or just to have servants around the house. That would be wonderful for an INFP. They almost want to live a sort of more aristocratic life, you could say, something which is a bit sort of separated from having to actually look at things and improve how it works and collect data and check that and revise that. That kind of that will just be mentally exhausting for an INFP, a type which doesn't often have much energy to begin with. So now we moved out of the super ego block, we can look at the super id block, which is valued, but still weak. So this is about the pursuit of power, the strength of one's convictions and one's ideology, the imposition of one's will upon one's environment. All areas which the INFP is not naturally very strong, but which they actually have a great deal of valuing for. So first of all, we have the suggestive function, extroverted sensation. So the thing about INFPs is that they are so in their heads, they're so imagery and future oriented, they really struggle with anything that's just in the day, that's just about acting right here, right now. They're at their best in the far off future, or imagining back into the past, or even just exploring a completely fictional world. There's nothing about that which ties into right here, right now. The thing is, they actually want to feel alive right here, right now. They feel almost trapped in their heads at times. They want someone to almost grab them by the shoulder, shake them, create that urgency, create the sort of do or die situation by which they can actually act. Until then, they'll feel trapped, they'll feel almost paralyzed, not able to act, not having the options reduced enough to a simple do or die for them to actually feel like they can just spring into action. So they are deeply appreciative of those who can create that intensity, can create greater urgency. INFPs are types which are naturally, I'd say, more submissive in their nature, not because they are conflict averse, but because they like to submit to strength. That's the thing. It's not that they're conflict averse, it's that they actually respect those who are tough. INFPs may complain that someone is being brutal, someone is actually making them do things they don't want to do, and they may even be quite stubborn and disagreeable. Nevertheless, despite their stubbornness, they can also be very pliable when it comes to you just, instead of arguing with them, just make them do it. Just making an INFP do something, they will fold. They will give in to that. They will be moved. They will be pushed to do the thing they said they weren't going to do because you applied pressure, you applied force to them. There's almost a strange respect they can have for that. They can, on the one hand, befriend the underdog and advocate for the underdog and the brutal treatment under the dictator, but at the same time, be very comfortable being around people of great power and sometimes the ability to enact their willpower on others. It's a strange dichotomy you find, well, duality you can find there with an INFP. Examples can include looking at, say, Mahatma Gandhi, who, in a way, was successful because he bowed to the colonialist. He allowed them to do what they would onto him, and by being someone who gave in to them and submitted, refused to use violence, but allowed violence to be done to him, he was then able to wield a moral or ideological and spiritual strength, which enabled him to secure the independence of India. Or if you look, say, at Mother Teresa, she was someone who was very much about talking to various, powerful people, sometimes even dictators, and was able sort of attracted to that kind of power and influence. So it's a very curious thing you may find with INFPs. Now, also, if you look at, say, the work of Nietzsche and the sort of the looking up to the Übermensch, this idea of a more powerful, almost godlike being, which man will eventually become or essentially give way to over time. In contrast, the pliable INFP in the more sensory realm becomes very stubborn in their introverted thinking. These are types who grow over time to discover the intellectual truth. What is absolutely true, 100%. There is no doubting it. There is only faith in that being the underlying truth of this universe. So INFPs are very much people of faith, faith in the underlying truth, which goes beyond any day-to-day factual observations, any sort of trivial anomalies. The INFP is one which says, no, this is absolutely true. And even though outwardly they may be very pliable in what you make them do, and they may be very diplomatic in their mood to the point where you may often assume actually agree with you, under the surface, there is a very stubborn character, someone whose ideologies will not shift, who will not change their mind over matters critical to their identity and their ideological positions. INFPs often are it's often they're very uncompromising, but very clear in terms of what they actually believe in. You may meet the INFP online, who is, for instance, the Marxist or the libertarian, and that the isms are something which they believe very strongly in. But this idea is that they've sort of grown towards it over time. They're very interpersonal people and spiritually or inclined people who then acquire certain rigid principles, and that can guide them very strongly. Sometimes it might not guide them very well, especially if they're advancing a certain ideology without any mind towards the practical realities, such as in its worst case, Pol Pot with the Khmer Rouge and the advancement of his agrarian society and the millions who died as a result. Or you could say Robespierre in revolutionary France. Examples there of INFPs who pursued ideology to a dangerous extent without mind to what was actually happening practically. But yeah, even with someone like Gandhi, where his belief against using penicillin actually led to the death of his wife. Practical realities are not important, but the ideology, that is what's important. The structure, the truth of that structure cannot be supplanted by what is simply shown to work in a particular moment. So that can be a difficult thing with some people dealing with INFPs. They may seem like they agree with you, actually you haven't changed their mind, and you may think you've changed their mind with facts, but they'll go back to saying what they were thinking just before. It can be very intellectually stubborn, INFPs. Now, finally, we get to the id block. Now, the id block, this is about, what is strong but not valued. So what you'll find is that the INFP is a type which is about what is ultimately significant and meaningful. These are people of a faith. These are people who want to develop an intellectual understanding through which they can analyze the deeper themes of a universe, whatever that is. So the idea of simply exploring different individual perspectives is less interesting to them. These are people of world change and finding logical beliefs and philosophies to change the world with. These are not types who simply want to go and explore each individual and what they personally think. So NE&FI is not much of an attractive thing to an INFP. When it comes to ignoring function, it's the extroverted intuition. INFPs, as I said, can be very stubborn. Once they find that path of meaning and significance in their lives, they're just going to see anything outside of that as a distraction, as something which could lead them astray from what is actually ultimately important. INFPs are very deeply imaginative people, but at the same time, they actually can be quite narrow. This is once they found that path, of course. They go through a period of breadth in which they end up exploring and trying to find different points of view, different influences to eventually discover that meaningful path ahead. But once they found it, they then actually narrow down a lot because they found their meaningful path. Now there's no point looking outside of it. So they can be very set on what the outcome is and how, and essentially be inclined to dismiss things which don't line up to that ultimate path ahead. So yeah, that's what I say about the ignoring function. It's not that it's weak; it's just that it's not valued. It's deliberately suppressed by their introverted intuition. And yeah, then we have the demonstrative function, which is introverted feeling. Now, this the INFP uses a lot more. Now, as I said, over time they grow towards becoming more structural, more logical, you could say, in terms of how things fit together in a very academic way. You may know more often, you may see with perhaps some men, especially becoming more academic, more likely to like talking about a certain area or niche field which they've developed expertise in. But to start off with, it's about one-to-one personal relationships. And INFPs are very talented at building intimacy with each individual they think has some kind of long-term significance according to their vision. So what they're very good at doing is befriending certain people, and evaluating the value and worth of each individual, deciding how close they want to be to said people, and then utilizing both introverted feeling and extroverted feeling together to work with people on the one-to-one to kind of position them towards what will lead to that long-term outcome, which they think is being most important. This is why INFPs are so successful as the grey cardinals, the people behind the curtain, rather than the person up front for everyone to look at. They're very good at sort of working the different chess pieces, you could say, into the right kind of formation by working with people to get to where they want to go. So, yeah, although they aren't the active one leading the charge, behind the scenes, they can set up events very well, very effectively. And that's how their introverted feeling is used as a tool to support their NI and FE. All right. So that's what I'd say about the INFP, the dual type to the ESTP.
If you feel much more knowledgeable from watching this video, just think about what you could do if you knew how to apply what you had learned. In the Type Mastery pathway, you'll learn how to accurately type other people, and if you're ready to take the final exam, you can earn a certificate accrediting you as a WSS Socionist. Again, for more information, click the link in the description below.